The town of hopes and clung to the edge of the Texas Badlands like a stubborn, sun-bleached weed. It was a place of last chances, a dusty collection of clapboard buildings that had seen more dreams die than a battlefield. At the social and spiritual center of this fading hope was the Last Chance Saloon, and in the darkest, most forgotten corner of that saloon, you could always find Cole Whiskey Younger. To the townspeople, Cole was a fixture, a piece of sad, predictable furniture. He was the town drunk. Every day, from the moment the saloon doors opened until the bartender, a weary man named Silas, swept him out at night, Cole was there, nursing a bottle of the cheapest, rawest whiskey the place had to offer. He was a ghost at the feast of other men's lives, a tall, once powerful frame now stooped and gone, his face a roadmap of broken veins and shattered promises. His eyes, a startling, pale blue, were usually clouded with a boozy fog, seeing not the present, but the specters of a past he was desperately trying to drown. The children would sometimes mock him, calling out Whiskey Younger, fell down under, and the respectable folk, like the self-important mayor, Josiah Finch, or the pious Mrs. Gable from the church society, would look at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a cautionary tale, a living sermon on the evils of drink and the weakness of a man's character. But a few of the old-timers, the ones who had been in the territory for a long time, sometimes looked at Cole with a different expression, a kind of wary, fearful respect. They remembered a different man, a man from 15 years ago who had worn a U.S. Marshal's badge and had been known by a different name, Cole the Reaper Younger. They remembered a man whose speed with a Colt was a thing of legend, a lawman who had single-handedly broken the notorious Iron Hand gang in a bloody, two-day siege. They remembered a man who had been the hardest, bravest, and most feared lawman in the territory. And they remembered the day it had all ended. The day he had brought the last of the Iron Hand gang to justice, only to come home to his small ranch and find his wife and young daughter gone, taken by the cholera that had swept through the valley like a silent, invisible fire. The Reaper, the man who had faced down a dozen guns without flinching, had been broken by an enemy he could not see, an enemy he could not shoot. He hadn't pinned his badge, had hung up his guns, and had started his long, slow, and very public suicide in the bottom of a whiskey bottle. This afternoon was like any other. Cole was in his usual corner, his back to the wall, his eyes half closed, a half-empty bottle his only companion. The saloon was filled with the usual assortment of ranchers, drifters, and a group of particularly loud, arrogant men who were strangers to the town. These men were part of the Black Dog Gang, a new and vicious pack of wolves led by a man named Black Jack Corrigan. They had been in town for a week, their presence a low, simmering threat that had the whole of Hope's End on edge. They were casing the town, their greedy eyes on the Wells Fargo office and the fat payroll that was due to arrive on the evening stage. One of the thugs, a young, cocky gunslinger named Reno, who fancied himself a wit, swaggered over to Cole's table. "Hey, old man," he sneered, his voice loud enough for the whole saloon to hear. "Buy a man a drink." Cole didn't open his eyes. He just slowly, deliberately, put his hand around the neck of his bottle, a possessive, almost loving gesture. "Get your own," he mumbled, his voice a slurred, gravelly sound. Reno laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. He reached down and snatched the bottle from Cole's grasp. "I think I'll just take this one," he said, taking a long swallow. "What's the matter, old-timer? You gonna do something about it?" The whole saloon was watching. This was a familiar, pathetic ritual. The town drunk being baited. They expected Cole to do what he always did, either pass out or stumble away in a haze of drunken, impotent rage. But today, something was different. Cole slowly, very slowly, opened his eyes. And for a single, stunning moment, the boozy fog was gone. The eyes that looked up at Reno were not the eyes of a broken-down drunk. They were the pale, clear, and utterly cold eyes of the Reaper. They were the eyes of a man looking at a target. "Son," Cole said, and his voice was no longer slurred, but a low, steady, and chillingly sober rumble. "You have made a mistake." Reno, for all his bravado, felt a sudden, cold chill. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of cornered wolves and dying men. But he was in too deep to back down now. He laughed, a little too loud, a little too forced. "Oh, yeah. And what are you gonna do about it, you old—" He never finished the sentence. Cole's hand moved. It was not the blinding speed of his youth. It was a slow, almost lazy movement. But it was a movement of absolute, unwavering purpose. He didn't reach for a gun he no longer carried. He reached for the empty whiskey glass on his table. He smashed the bottom of the glass on the edge of the table, the sound a sharp, shocking crack in the silent room. He then lunged upward, not with the stumbling lurch of a drunk, but with the explosive, coiled power of a striking rattlesnake. He drove the jagged, broken edge of the glass into Reno's gun hand, the sharp points severing tendons and grinding on bone. Reno screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony and surprise, his pistol clattering from his suddenly useless hand. Cole was on him, a whirlwind of brutal, street-fighting efficiency. He drove his knee into the man's groin, and as Reno doubled over, he brought his fist, a hammer of calloused bone, crashing down on the back of the man's neck. Reno collapsed in a heap, unconscious. Cole stood over the body, his chest heaving, the broken glass still clutched in his hand, his eyes blazing with a fire that had been banked for 15 long years. The saloon was in a stunned, absolute silence. The laughing-stock, the town drunk, the pathetic, broken-down ghost, had just come back to life. And he had done so with a terrifying, and very sober, fury. The stunned silence in the Last Chance saloon was broken by the scrape of chairs as Reno's two companions jumped to their feet, their hands flying to their pistols. They had come to watch a fool be baited. They had not expected the fool to bite back with the ferocity of a rabid wolf. Cole did not retreat. He stood his ground over Reno's unconscious body, the jagged remains of the whiskey glass still held in his hand like a primitive, deadly weapon. His pale blue eyes, now completely clear and shockingly alive, met the gaze of the two outlaws. There was no fear in his eyes. There was only a vast, empty, and terrifying coldness. The bartender, Silas, a man who valued his own skin and the integrity of his glassware above all else, finally found his voice. "Now, hold on, boys," he yelled, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "There's no need for any gunplay." But the outlaws were not listening. Their friend was on the floor, and their pride was on the line. It was then that the saloon doors were thrown open, and the imposing, brutal figure of Black Jack Corrigan filled the doorway. Corrigan was a mountain of a man, with a thick, black beard that covered a face that was already a testament to a life of violence. His eyes, small and black like beads of obsidian, took in the scene in a single, quick, and intelligent glance, his men on the floor, his other two men with their guns half drawn, and the town drunk, standing over the body, looking for all the world like a cornered, and very dangerous, animal. Corrigan was not a fool. He was a leader, and a leader knows when to assert control. "Holster your weapons," he said, his voice a low, gravelly boom that was not a request, but a command. His men, after a moment's hesitation, reluctantly did as they were told. Corrigan walked into the room, his spurs ringing a slow, deliberate death knell on the floorboards. He stopped in front of Cole. He looked down at the unconscious Reno, then up at Cole, a look of something almost like professional curiosity in his eyes. "You've got some fire in you yet, old man," Corrigan said, his voice a low, almost conversational rumble. "I like that. But you've also got a problem. You just hurt one of my men. A very expensive man." Cole slowly, deliberately, dropped the broken glass to the floor, the sound a final, sharp tinkle in the quiet room. "He touched my bottle," he said, his voice a low, flat statement of fact. Corrigan let out a short, harsh laugh. "Your bottle," he said. He looked around the silent saloon, at the frightened faces of the townspeople who were trying to make themselves invisible. "This town, it's a sad, pathetic place. But it has one thing of value. The Wells Fargo payroll, due in on the evening stage. My men and I are here to make a withdrawal." He looked back at Cole. "And you, old man, are going to be my insurance." He gestured to his men. "Take him." Before Cole could react, the two thugs were on him. He fought back, a sudden, desperate explosion of his old, forgotten strength. He was a big man, and even 15 years of whiskey hadn't completely eroded the powerful muscles of his youth. He threw one of the men off him, sending him crashing into a table. But he was rusty, his movements slowed by years of neglect. The second man brought the barrel of his pistol down on the back of Cole's head. The world exploded in a shower of white-hot stars, and Cole collapsed, the embers of his brief, furious resurrection extinguished, plunging him back into the familiar, welcoming darkness. He awoke in the cold, damp confines of the town's small, stone-walled jail cell. His head was a symphony of pain, a deep, throbbing ache that seemed to be in time with the frantic, terrified beating of his own heart. The alcoholic fog he had lived in for so long was completely gone, burned away by the shock of the violence, leaving him in a state of raw, agonizing sobriety. And with sobriety came the ghosts. He saw them in the shadows of the cell. He saw his wife, Maria, her gentle, smiling face. He saw his daughter, little Sarah, her laughter like the sound of tiny silver bells. They were not comforting visions. They were his accusers. He had failed them. He had been a lawman, a protector, but he had not been there to protect them from the silent, invisible killer that had stolen them away. And in the wake of that failure, he had become this pathetic, broken thing, a man who had traded his honor for the false comfort of a bottle. The laughter of the town drunk, Reno, echoed in his mind. What are you gonna do about it, you old? He had done something. He had fought back. And in that brief, violent, and surprisingly sober moment, he had felt a flicker of the man he used to be, the Reaper. The door to the jail opened, and the timid, ineffectual form of Sheriff Miller stood there, his face a pale, sweating mask of fear. They've taken over the town, Cole, the sheriff stammered, wringing his hands. Corrigan and his men. They've locked the mayor and the other councilmen in the hotel. They say if anyone tries to be a hero, they'll start shooting hostages. And they say they're going to hang you in the town square when the stage arrives, as a message. Cole looked at the pathetic, terrified lawman, and something inside him, a long dormant ember of his old, professional contempt, was stoked. And what are you going to do about it, Sheriff? Cole asked, his voice a low, rough rasp. What can I do? Miller whined. I'm one man. They're a dozen. Cole slowly, painfully, pushed himself to a sitting position on the hard, stone cot. He looked at his own, trembling hands. They were the hands of a drunk, but they were also the hands that had once been the fastest in the territory. Let me out of this cell, Miller, Cole said, and his voice was no longer the voice of a drunk or a broken man. It was the voice of a U.S. Marshal, a voice of cold, absolute command. The sheriff stared at him, his mouth agape. He saw the change in Cole's eyes, the fire that was beginning to burn there, a fire that was not just the last, desperate flicker of a dying man, but the slow, steady, and terrifying stoking of a sleeping volcano. Sheriff Miller was a man drowning in his own inadequacy. He stood frozen in the doorway of the jail cell, caught between the terrifying, immediate threat of Black Jack Corrigan and the strange, unsettling authority that was now radiating from the town drunk. Cole Younger, the man he had locked up for brawling 100 times, was looking at him not with a boozy haze, but with the clear, cold, and utterly commanding eyes of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed. I can't do that, Cole, Miller stammered, taking a step back. Corrigan, he said he'd kill me if I let you out. Cole slowly, painfully, got to his feet. He walked to the bars of the cell, his movements still stiff, his head still throbbing, but with a new, deliberate purpose. He gripped the cold, iron bars, his knuckles white. Listen to me, Miller, he said, his voice a low, intense whisper that was more compelling than any shout. You have a choice. You can stay a mouse, and you can watch Corrigan and his men tear this town apart, kill your friends, and then probably kill you when they're done. Or you can find whatever small piece of a man you have left inside you, and you can do your job. You can unlock this door, and you can let me help you. He was a master of men, a skill that had been varied, but not forgotten. He saw the flicker of conflict in the sheriff's eyes, the war between his fear and his duty. I was a lawman once, Miller, Cole continued, his voice softening, becoming a thing of quiet, shared confession. A long time ago. I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like to be outnumbered. But I also know that there comes a moment when a man has to decide what he's willing to die for. Your town is out there, Sheriff. What are you willing to do for it? He was not just asking a question. He was holding up a mirror. Miller looked at the man in the cell. He saw not just the town drunk, but the ghost of a legend he had only heard stories about. And he saw the truth of his own pathetic situation. He was the law in this town, and he had done nothing. With a trembling hand, he reached for the ring of keys at his belt. His movements were slow, hesitant, the act of a man at war with his own cowardice. He unlocked the cell door. The heavy iron creaked open. Cole stepped out. He was free, but he was also weak and armed, and still fighting the tremor of a decade-long hangover. "My guns," Cole said, his voice a flat command. "The gunsmith has them. An old Colt Peacemaker and a Navy model. He's been holding them for me for 15 years. Miller just nodded, a new, dawning sense of purpose in his own eyes. "I'll get them." "No," Cole said. "You won't. You'll be seen. You're the sheriff. Your job now is to be invisible. Go home. Lock your door. Create the illusion that the law in this town has completely and utterly collapsed. Give them a sense of absolute confidence. I will get my own guns." He looked down at his own shabby clothes. "And I'll need a few other things. A bottle of your best whiskey, a piece of rope, and the coat from that dead man in the corner." He gestured to a pile of belongings from a drifter who had died in the cell a month ago. Miller, his mind reeling with a confusion that was slowly being replaced by a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose, did as he was told. He was no longer the man in charge. He was a foot soldier, taking orders from a general who had just, miraculously, risen from the dead. Cole worked quickly. He took the bottle of whiskey and, to Miller's astonishment, poured half of it over his own head and clothes, the sharp, alcoholic stench filling the small office. He took a long, deep swallow from the bottle, and then, with a look of profound, visceral disgust, he spat it out. He was not drinking. He was putting on a costume. The costume of the man he had been for the last 15 years. The costume of the town drunk. "They're watching the front of the jail," Cole said, his mind now working with a cold, tactical clarity. "They're expecting you to be here, cowering. But there's a back window. Small. Overlooks the alley." He gave his final instructions to Miller. "The stage is due in 2 hours. That's when Corrigan will make his move on the Wells Fargo office. I need you to do one thing for me. When you hear the first shot, I need you to get to the church. And I need you to ring that bell. Ring it like you're trying to wake the dead. Can you do that?" Miller, his heart pounding, nodded. Cole gave him a long, hard look. "Good man," he said. It was a simple, two-word validation, but for Sheriff Miller, it was the beginning of his own personal redemption. Cole slipped out the back window, a silent, agile movement that was a shocking contradiction to the persona he was now wearing. He landed in the alley, a shambling, whiskey-soaked figure in the afternoon sun. He took another swig from the bottle, letting the cheap liquor dribble down his chin, and began to stumble down the alley, a perfect imitation of the pathetic, harmless town drunk. One of Corrigan's lookouts, perched on the roof of the general store, saw him. He watched for a moment, then left and turned his attention back to the front of the jail. It was just old Whiskey Younger, on his way back to the saloon. Harmless. But Cole was not heading for the saloon. He was heading for the gunsmith's shop, and for a reunion with the ghosts of his own terrible, and now very much needed, past. The key had been turned, and the Reaper was now walking free in the streets of Hope's End. The gunsmith's shop was a place of quiet, orderly craftsmanship, a stark contrast to the simmering chaos that had taken over the rest of Hope's End. The gunsmith himself, a German immigrant named Schmidt, was a man of few words and precise habits. He was also one of the few old-timers who remembered the man Cole Younger used to be, and he had always treated Cole not with contempt, but with a kind of sad, silent respect. Cole stumbled through the back door of the shop, his drunk act so convincing that for a moment, even Schmidt was fooled. "Out, Cole," Schmidt said, his voice a low, guttural grumble, though there was no real heat in it. "I have work to do. There is no charity here today." Cole closed the door behind him and leaned against it. He slowly, deliberately, straightened up. He wiped the whiskey from his chin with the back of his hand. He looked at Schmidt, and his eyes were as clear and as cold as a mountain lake in winter. The transformation was so sudden, so absolute, that Schmidt took an involuntary step back, his hand reaching for the heavy ball-peen hammer on his workbench. "Schmidt," Cole said, his voice a low, sober rumble. "I've come for them." The old German's eyes widened in a dawning, incredulous understanding. He stared at Cole for a long, silent moment, then gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. He turned and walked to the back of his shop, to a large, heavy, fireproof safe that was built into the stone wall. He worked the combination, his large, capable hands moving with a familiar precision. The heavy door swung open. From the very back of the safe, from a velvet-lined shelf that had not been disturbed in 15 years, he took out a long, wooden case. He placed it on the workbench and opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-cut, faded red velvet, were the Reaper's tools. A matched pair of Colt peacemakers, their barrels a standard, lethal length, their original wooden grips replaced with a dark, polished ebony. They were beautiful, deadly works of art. Between them lay a gun belt, its leather dark and supple, its two holsters hanging at a perfect, slight forward cant, designed for a lightning-fast, two-handed draw. Cole reached out and touched the cool, smooth grip of the right-hand Colt. It was like a man touching the hand of a long-lost love. The 15 years of alcoholic haze, of grief, of self-loathing, it all seemed to melt away in that single, electric moment of contact. He was not just a man holding a gun. He was a master, reunited with his instrument. He stripped off the dead man's coat and strapped on the gun belt. The familiar weight on his hips was a profound comfort, a settling of his own internal center of gravity. He drew the Colts, his hands moving not with the blinding speed of his youth, but with a smooth, economical, and utterly confident grace. He checked their action, the cylinder spinning with a sound that was as smooth as old silk. Schmidt had not been just a caretaker. He had been a curator. He had kept the guns meticulously cleaned, perfectly oiled, ready for a day he had likely prayed would never come. "The ammunition is in the bottom drawer," Schmidt said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. He was no longer speaking to the town drunk. He was speaking to a legend. Cole loaded the two Colts, the soft, methodical click-click-click of the process a kind of deadly prayer. He was whole again. The ghost in the bottle had been replaced by the Reaper with the guns. He then laid out his plan to Schmidt, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He was not just planning a gunfight. He was planning a war. He needed distractions. He needed a second front. He needed noise. "The old prospecting supplies," Cole said. "In your storeroom. Dynamite, fuses, blasting caps." Schmidt's eyes widened again, this time with a new, dawning alarm. "I am not going to blow up the town, old man," Cole said, a flicker of a grim, humorless smile touching his lips. "I just need to get their attention." For the next hour, as the sun began its slow, afternoon descent, the two men worked with a quiet, focused intensity. Cole, his mind now a cold, tactical instrument, laid out his battle plan. He would not face Corrigan's gang head-on. That was a fool's game. He would use the town itself as a weapon. He would be a ghost, a whisper, a force of chaos and confusion that would dismantle them from the inside out. He prepared a series of small, diversionary explosives, little more than a half stick of dynamite with a short, timed fuse, wrapped in a bundle with a handful of loud, but harmless, blasting caps. He then looked at Schmidt. "The bell," he said. "Sheriff Miller will ring the church bell when the shooting starts. That will be the signal for the townspeople to stay inside, to lock their doors. But I need another signal. For Corrigan." He explained his idea. It was a mad, brilliant, and terrifyingly dangerous piece of psychological warfare. As the time for the stagecoach's arrival drew near, Cole was ready. He was no longer Whiskey Younger, the town drunk. He was Cole the Reaper Younger, the U.S. Marshal. He had his guns, he had a plan, and he had a 15-year-old debt of pain and grief to repay, not just to the memory of his family, but to himself. He slipped out the back of the gunsmith shop, a dark, silent figure now, moving through the back alleys of the town he was about to turn into a war zone. He was a ghost, and he was going hunting. The sun was a fiery, bleeding mound on the western horizon as the Deadwood stagecoach, a lumbering, dust-covered beast, rumbled into the main street of Hope's End. The arrival of the stage, usually a moment of cheerful, bustling activity, was met with an eerie and natural silence. The streets were empty. The doors and windows of the buildings were all shuttered. The town was holding its breath. Black Jack Corrigan and his men, who had taken up positions on the boardwalk in front of the Wells Fargo office, watched the stage approach with a confident, predatory arrogance. Their hostages, Mayor Finch and the other town elders, were bound and gagged inside the office, a final, brutal piece of insurance. The stage driver, a grizzled old man named Charlie, pulled his team to a halt, his face a pale, sweating mask of fear. He had seen the armed men, the empty street, and he knew he had just driven into the middle of a holdup. "All right, Charlie," Corrigan boomed, stepping forward. "You know the drill. Throw down the box." From his hidden position on the roof of the general store, across the street from the Wells Fargo office, Cole Younger watched the scene unfold. He was a silent, coiled spring of potential energy, his twin Colts resting on the parapet before him, his eyes cold and steady. This was it, the moment of truth. The Wells Fargo agent, a small, terrified man named Peterson, was pushed out of his office door by one of Corrigan's thugs. "Open the safe, Peterson," the thug snarled. As Peterson fumbled with the combination, his hands trembling, Cole knew it was time. He did not aim for Corrigan. He did not aim for any of the men. That was not how this overture began. He aimed for the large, ornate sign of the Wells Fargo office. He fired both Colts in a single, deafening, rolling thunderclap. The two heavy slugs tore through the wooden sign, sending a shower of splinters and paint chips down onto the heads of the outlaws below. It was not an attack. It was a declaration. "I am here." Chaos erupted. The outlaws, startled by the sudden, unexpected attack from above, began firing wildly at the roof of the general store. The stagecoach driver, Charlie, in a moment of pure, panicked courage, whipped his team of horses into a frenzy, the heavy coach lurching forward and careening down the street, out of the line of fire. At the same moment, at the far end of town, Sheriff Miller, who had been waiting with a terrible, anxious patience in the church belfry, heard the shots. With a prayer on his lips, he began to pull on the heavy bell rope. The church bell began to ring, a loud, frantic, and desperate clang that was the signal for the townspeople to lock their doors and pray. Corrigan, his face a mask of enraged surprise, roared at his men. "He's on the roof. Get him." But as three of his men broke from cover and began to charge across the street towards the general store, a new, and far more terrifying, sound was heard. A massive explosion ripped through the back of the livery stable, at the opposite end of town. It was one of Cole's pre-placed charges. The explosion was not large enough to cause serious damage, but it was a deep, concussive boom, and the accompanying clatter of the blasting caps sounded like a full-scale battle. The three charging outlaws stopped in their tracks, their heads whipping around towards the new, unexpected sound. And then, another explosion, this time from the alley behind the saloon. And another, from the direction of the blacksmith's forge. Cole was not fighting a gunfight. He was conducting an orchestra of chaos. He had turned the entire town into a weapon. The outlaws, who had thought they were facing a single, rooftop sniper, were now convinced they were surrounded, that the town had risen up in a full-scale, armed rebellion. Their disciplined, confident line began to crumble. Corrigan, a veteran of a dozen such robberies, was momentarily thrown. He was a good strategist, but his strategy was based on a simple, predictable equation: his superior force against a weaker, terrified opponent. This was something else. This was madness. "It's a trick," he roared, trying to regain control. "It's one man. He's trying to spook us. Hold your positions." But it was then that Cole, under the cover of the confusion he had created, revealed the true, terrifying nature of his overture. From the roof of the general store, a new sound was heard. It was not a gunshot. It was the sound of a German-made music box, its tiny, tinny melody, a sweet, innocent children's lullaby, drifting down into the chaotic, smoke-filled street. It was a sound so bizarre, so out of place, that it was profoundly, deeply unsettling. It was the calling card of a madman. This was the signal that Schmidt, the gunsmith, had been waiting for. From the back of his shop, he lit the fuse on the final, and most important, part of their plan. He opened a small, iron grate that led to the town's disused, underground storm drain system, a network of tunnels that ran beneath the main street. He dropped the hissing, sputtering bundle inside. A moment later, a series of deep, subterranean rumbles were heard, and thick, acrid, black smoke began to pour out of the storm grates up and down the main street, a foul, choking fog that quickly began to fill the town square. The Devil's Overture was complete. The outlaws were now trapped in a disorienting, smoke-filled landscape, their visibility reduced to a few feet, their ears ringing from explosions, their nerves shattered by the insane, tinkling melody of a child's music box that seemed to be coming from the very sky itself. They were no longer confident outlaws. They were terrified men, lost in a fog of war, being hunted by a ghost who had just, quite literally, unleashed hell upon them. The main street of Hope's End had become a landscape from a nightmare. The thick, oily smoke from Schmidt's concoction billowed from the storm drains, a choking, blinding fog that reduced the world to a series of shifting, monstrous shapes. The frantic, desperate ringing of the church bell, the last, dying echoes of Cole's explosions, and the insane, endlessly repeating melody of the music box all blended together into a symphony of terror. The Black Dog Gang, which moments before had been a disciplined unit of hardened killers, was now a scattered, disorganized mob of terrified individuals. They were firing at shadows, at the sound of each other's panicked shouts, their professional cohesion completely gone. This was the battlefield Cole Younger had created, a battlefield of the mind. And now, he began to hunt in it. He slipped down from the roof of the general store, a dark, silent shape in the swirling smoke. He was no longer a sniper. He was a wraith, a close-quarters predator in his natural element. He moved with a quiet, deadly purpose, his twin Colts held at the ready, his senses, honed by 15 years of sobriety and a lifetime of violence, on a razor's edge. He found his first targets huddled behind an overturned water trough, two of Corrigan's men who were trying to make sense of the chaos. They never saw him coming. He emerged from the smoke directly behind them, a silent, avenging angel. "Looking for me, boys," he whispered, his voice a low, rough rumble that was the last thing they ever heard. Two sharp, distinct gunshots, and two more of Corrigan's men were gone. He was not just killing them. He was dismantling their will to fight. He became a ghost in the fog, a whisper of death that could come from any direction. He would let one of his empty whiskey bottles, which he had brought for just this purpose, roll out into the street. When a nervous outlaw would fire at the sound, Cole would use the muzzle flash to pinpoint the man's position and end the fight with a single, precise shot from the darkness. Black Jack Corrigan was a man pushed to the brink of his own considerable limits. He was a smart, brutal leader, but he was a man who relied on a clear, understandable enemy. This was something else. He was fighting a phantom, a madman who used music boxes and smoke and explosions as his weapons. He tried to rally his remaining men, his voice a raw, desperate roar in the fog. "To the bank! Get to the bank! It's stone. We can hold them off from there." It was a sound, desperate plan. The stone-walled bank was the most defensible position in the town. He and four of his remaining men began a desperate, scrambling retreat towards it. But Cole had anticipated this. He was not just a gunfighter, he was a master of the terrain. He knew this town, every alley, every rooftop, every weak point. As Corrigan and his men ran, their figures dark, fleeting shapes in the fog, a new threat emerged. From the second-story window of the hotel, a window that overlooked the entrance to the bank, a shotgun roared. It was not one of Cole's Colts. It was the heavy, booming voice of a greener, a weapon of brutal, close-quarters power. The blast of buckshot caught Corrigan's men in the open, cutting down two of them in a single, shredding wave. Corrigan and his two remaining men dove for the cover of the bank's doorway, their faces a mask of new, dawning horror. The ghost was not alone. In the hotel window, Sheriff Miller stood, the smoking shotgun in his hands, his face a grim, determined mask. He had followed Cole's instructions. He had rung the bell. And then, he had made a choice. He was not going to be a mouse. He was going to be the law. He had found his courage, and it had a 10-gauge bore. Corrigan and his last two men scrambled into the bank, barricading the heavy oak doors, their sanctuary now a trap. The fog of war was beginning to clear, revealing the stark, bloody reality of the new situation. Corrigan's proud army of a dozen men had been reduced to 3, trapped in the bank. They were no longer the besiegers. They were the besieged. Outside in the quiet, smoke-filled street, Cole Younger stood, a silent, solitary figure. He reloaded his Colts with a slow, deliberate calm. He looked at the bank, a dark, silent fortress. The overture was over. The wild, chaotic melee was done. Now came the final, personal, and deadly act. The siege. The bank in Hope's End was not built for a siege, but it was the closest thing the town had to a fortress. Its stone walls were thick, its windows were barred, and its heavy, oak doors were reinforced with iron. For Black Jack Corrigan and his two remaining men, it was their last, desperate chance. Outside, the smoke was beginning to clear, revealing the carnage in the street. The townspeople, drawn by the sudden, shocking silence, began to emerge from their homes, their faces a mixture of terror and a dawning, incredulous hope. They saw the bodies of the outlaws. They saw their timid sheriff, standing in the window of the hotel, a smoking shotgun in his hands. And they saw Cole Younger, a calm, deadly specter in the center of it all. Sheriff Miller came down and met Cole in the street. The two men, the disgraced legend and the newly forged lawman, stood together, a new and spoken alliance between them. "They're in the bank," Miller said, his voice a low, steady rumble, all trace of his former fear gone. "What's the plan?" "We wait," Cole replied, his pale blue eyes fixed on the dark, silent windows of the bank. "They have the hostages. We can't rush them. We let them sweat. We let them think about the ghosts they just saw." The town of Hope's End was now transformed. It was no longer a collection of frightened individuals. It was a community, a posse. The blacksmith and a half-dozen other men, armed with rifles and shotguns, took up positions around the bank, their movements now coordinated by their sheriff. The joke of a lawman had become a true commander. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was a toxic mixture of fear and recrimination. Corrigan's two men were on the verge of a complete breakdown. "We're gonna die here, boss," one of them, a young outlaw named Danny, whined, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Shut up," Corrigan snarled, his own nerves frayed to the breaking point. He was pacing the small confines of the bank lobby like a caged tiger. He had been so close. The payroll, the victory, the legend of the man who had tamed Hope's End. Now, it was all ash in his mouth. And it was all because of one impossible, resurrected ghost. He dragged the town's mayor, Josiah Finch, to the front window, a pistol pressed to the man's head. "Younger," he roared, his voice a raw, desperate sound. "I know you're out there. You want your mayor back. You come in here and face me, man to man." Cole, from his position across the street, did not answer. He would not play by Corrigan's rules. This was his game now. The sun began to set, and the long, tense vigil continued. The townspeople brought food and coffee to the men who were standing guard. They were a community at war, and their quiet, stubborn resolve was a palpable force. As darkness fell, Cole knew it was time to change the equation. He could not wait for Corrigan to grow more desperate, to start killing the hostages. He had to get inside the bank. He met with Sheriff Miller and Schmidt, the gunsmith. "The back wall," Cole said. "It adjoins the storeroom of your shop, Schmidt. It's the oldest part of the building. Not stone, adobe brick. It's 3 feet thick," Schmidt grumbled. "Then we'll have to be patient," Cole replied. For the next 2 hours, under the cover of a moonless night, the three men worked in the back of the gunsmith's shop. They did not use dynamite. The risk to the hostages was too great. They used hammers and chisels, a slow, painstaking, and almost silent process of chipping away at the thick, adobe wall. It was a grueling, sweat-soaked labor, but it was the work of determined men. And just after midnight, they broke through. They had created a small, man-sized hole that led directly into the pitch-black storeroom at the back of the bank. The final act was at hand. Cole stripped off his boots. He was a ghost again. He handed a second pistol to Sheriff Miller. "You are with me," he said. It was not a question. It was a graduation. "Schmidt, you will stay here. If you hear more than 3 shots, you will assume the worst, and you will do what you have to do." The two lawmen, the old and the new, slipped through the hole, into the lion's den. They were in the deep, silent darkness of the bank's storeroom. They could hear the low, nervous murmur of the outlaws' voices from the main lobby, just beyond a single, wooden door. The final, bloody siege of the Last Chance Saloon had now become the silent, deadly infiltration of the Bank of Hope's End. The darkness inside the bank's storeroom was absolute, a thick, suffocating blackness that smelled of old paper and dust and fear. Cole and Sheriff Miller stood perfectly still, their breathing shallow, their senses alive and tingling. From the other side of the door, they could hear the low, tense voices of Corrigan and his last 2 men. "He's not coming," one of them, the young one named Danny, was saying. "He's just gonna wait us out. We're gonna starve in here." "He'll come," Corrigan's voice, a low, confident snarl, replied. "His kind always does. He can't resist a final showdown. He's just waiting for the right moment, but we'll be ready for him. Cole knew, in that moment, that Corrigan was a man who understood only one kind of fight, the face-to-face, man-to-man gun battle. He was a creature of ego and pride, and that would be his undoing. Cole turned to Miller, his mouth close to the man's ear. "The hostages are in the manager's office, to the left of the main lobby," he whispered. "You will go for them. You will move silent. You will not fire unless you have no other choice. Your job is the innocent. The guilty are mine." Miller nodded, his face a grim, determined mask in the darkness. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, unwavering resolve. He was ready. Cole put his hand on the doorknob. It turned, silently, under his practiced touch. He slowly, inch by inch, opened the door, a mere crack, giving him a sliver of a view into the lamplit lobby. He saw them. Corrigan was standing near the front windows, his back to them, staring out at the dark, silent street. His other man, a hulking brute named Carver, was sitting at the teller's cage, a bottle of whiskey in his hand. The young one, Danny, was pacing nervously near the door to the manager's office, where the hostages were being held. The layout was perfect. It was a classic tactical problem, and the solution was a thing of brutal, simple geometry. Cole gave Miller a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The two men moved, not as a team, but as two separate, coordinated forces. Miller slipped through the doorway like a shadow, his shotgun held low, his movements a silent, creeping advance along the back wall, towards the manager's office. Cole moved to the right, into the deep shadows cast by the high teller's cage. He was a ghost, a whisper, and his target was Carver, the man with the whiskey. Carver never saw him coming. He was taking a long, deep swallow from the bottle when a hand, as strong and as final as an iron manacle, clamped down over his mouth, stifling his surprised cry. At the same time, the cold, hard steel of a Colt's barrel was pressed against his temple. "Make a sound," Cole whispered, his voice a chilling, deadly murmur in the man's ear, "and your partner will be cleaning your brains off this wall." The man froze, his body rigid with a pure, absolute terror. At the same time, at the other end of the lobby, Miller had reached the door to the manager's office. The young outlaw, Danny, heard the soft scuff of a boot and spun around, his eyes wide with a new, dawning panic. He opened his mouth to shout a warning. Miller did not hesitate. He did not give a command. He acted. He brought the butt of his shotgun around in a short, brutal arc that connected with the side of the young man's head. Danny collapsed without a sound, his part in the fight finished. Miller slipped into the office, where the three hostages looked up at him, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a wild, incredulous hope. He put a finger to his lips, and with his knife, he began to saw at their ropes. The entire, silent, coordinated takeover had taken less than 30 seconds. Now, only one man was left. Black Jack Corrigan. He was still at the front window, his back to the room, completely unaware that his army was gone, that his fortress had been breached from within. Cole pushed his own hostage, Carver, out into the center of the lobby. "It's over, Jack," he said, his voice a low, conversational sound in the quiet room. Corrigan spun around, his face a mask of shocked, uncomprehending rage. He saw his two men, down and out. He saw the empty doorway to the manager's office. He saw Cole, standing in the shadows, his Colt held steady, its aim true. He was beaten. He was alone. But Corrigan was not a man to surrender. His life was a testament to violence, and he would end it the same way. With a final, defiant roar, he brought his own pistol up. He was fast. Very fast. But he was not the Reaper. Cole fired once. A single, sharp, and final shot. Black Jack Corrigan stood frozen for a single, stunned heartbeat, a look of profound, final surprise on his face, a small, dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. Then he crumpled to the ground, his own, personal last chance having finally, irrevocably, been used up. A profound, ringing silence fell over the bank. The war for hope's end was over. Cole Younger stood in the quiet, lamplit lobby, his gun smoking, the ghosts of his own terrible past finally, blessedly, silent. He had come to this town to die, to drown in a bottle, but he had, instead, been resurrected. He had paid the price of his own soul, and in doing so, he had just bought back the soul of an entire town. The aftermath of the gunfight in the bank was a quiet, surreal affair. Sheriff Miller emerged from the manager's office with the three hostages, who were weeping with a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. They looked at the bodies of the outlaws, then at Cole, their faces a canvas of awe and a new, profound respect. Cole did not acknowledge them. He walked over to the unconscious form of the young outlaw, Danny. He checked the boy's pulse. It was steady. The boy would live. He then looked at the other man, Harver, who was still frozen in a state of pure, abject terror. "Get him out of here, Sheriff," Cole said, his voice a low, weary rumble. "Lock him up." He was a lawman again, his old, forgotten instincts as natural as breathing. As the townspeople, drawn by the sound of the final, single gunshot, began to gather outside, a new legend was already being born. The story of the town drunk who had, single-handedly, saved them all. But Cole was not interested in legends. He was a man facing his own, personal reckoning. He looked down at the twin Colts in his hands. They felt heavy now, a terrible, familiar weight. He had used them to save the town, but they were also the tools of the man he had tried so hard to kill, the ghost he had been trying to drown for 15 years. He walked out of the bank and into the main street, which was now filled with the grateful, awestruck faces of his neighbors. Mayor Finch, his dignity a little ruffled but his pomposity fully intact, strode forward, his hand outstretched. "Mr. Younger," he boomed. "On behalf of the town of Hope's End, we will you our lives, our homes, anything you want, anything we can give you. It's yours." Cole looked at the mayor's outstretched hand, then at the faces of the crowd. He saw no pity in their eyes. He saw no contempt. He only saw gratitude. He slowly, deliberately, holstered his pistols. He did not take the mayor's hand. He turned and began to walk, not towards the saloon, but towards the small, dusty road that led out of town, towards the cemetery on the hill. The crowd parted for him, a silent, respectful sea. They watched him go, a solitary, heroic figure walking away from the very town he had just saved. He walked to the two, small, weathered graves that were his only true home in this world. His wife, Maria. His daughter, Sarah. He knelt in the dust between them, the first light of a new dawn beginning to touch the eastern sky. He was not there to pray. He was there to confess. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken sound, the words a release of 15 years of pent-up grief and guilt. "I wasn't here for you. I was off, being a hero, being a legend, and I let you die." He reached for the bottle of whiskey that was still tucked in his belt, the last remnant of his long, slow suicide. He held it up, the cheap liquor glowing in the morning light. He was about to take a long, deep swallow, to embrace the old, familiar numbness. But then he thought of the look in Sheriff Miller's eyes, the look of a man who had found his own courage. He thought of the townspeople, who had looked at him not as a drunk, but as a savior. He thought of the man he had been, in the bank, in the street, the man who had been in control, who had been a protector. With a sudden, violent, and decisive motion, he threw the bottle. It sailed through the air and shattered against a rocky outcrop, its contents a final, brief, and ultimately empty offering to the ghosts of his past. He had a choice. He could stay here, in this graveyard, and let the ghosts of his wife and daughter, and the ghost of the man he used to be, finally consume him. Or, he could choose to live. He stood, his body aching, his soul weary beyond measure. He looked down at the town of Hope's End, which was now bathed in the clean, golden light of a new day. It was a broken, scarred, but ultimately resilient town. Just like him, the reckoning of the legend was over. The man, Cole Younger, was all that was left. And he had to decide what to do with the life he had just, against all odds, been given back. Cole Younger did not ride out of Hope's End. He walked back down the hill from the cemetery, a man returning from a long and arduous journey. He was not the same man who had walked up it. The ghost of the Reaper was gone, not vanquished, but integrated, a part of a new, more complex, and more complete whole. The ghost of the town drunk had been shattered, along with the whiskey bottle on the rocks. All that was left was the man himself, Cole Younger, and the quiet, terrifying, and exhilarating question of what came next. He walked into the sheriff's office. Miller was there, looking exhausted but filled with a new, steady confidence. The two prisoners, Carver and the boy, Danny, were locked in the cells, their bravado gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated silence. "The circuit judge will be here in a week," Miller said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "They'll be tried. They'll hang." He pushed a cup towards Cole. The town council met again. "The offer still stands. They want to make you the town marshal. A real one, with a real salary." Cole took the coffee, its warmth a comfort in his tired hands. He looked at the badge on Miller's chest, the old, tarnished star he had worn himself so long ago. He slowly, gently, shook his head. "That's your badge now, Sheriff," he said, his voice a quiet, steady rumble. "You've earned it." "But what about you, Cole?" Miller asked. "What will you do?" Cole looked out the window, at the town that was slowly, tentatively, coming back to life. He saw the blacksmith, already at his forge, the sound of his hammer a steady, hopeful heartbeat. He saw the women, sweeping the glass from the boardwalks, their movements a testament to an unyielding, domestic courage. "I don't know," he said, and for the first time, the words were not a statement of despair, but a statement of possibility. I think I'll just stay a while. See what happens." He did not go back to the Last Chance saloon, to his corner table and his bottle. He went to the gunsmith shop. Schmidt was there, sweeping up, his face a mask of quiet, profound respect. "I've come to pay a debt," Cole said. He took the twin ebony grip Colts from their holsters and placed them on the workbench. Schmidt looked at the guns, then at Cole, a question in his eyes. "Keep them for me," Cole said. "Clean them. Keep them safe. But I don't think I'll be needing them for a while." He walked out of the shop, his hips feeling strangely light and burdened. He was a gunfighter without his guns, a legend without his tools. He was just a man. He spent the rest of the day helping. He helped the blacksmith clear the wreckage of a burned-out wagon. He helped the stable boy round up the scattered, terrified horses from the stagecoach. He was a big man, and his strength, for so long wasted, was a welcome and surprising asset. The townspeople did not treat him as a hero. They did not clap him on the back or offer him free drinks. They did something far more profound. They treated him as a neighbor. They offered him a cup of water, a piece of bread, a quiet nod of thanks. They were giving him back not his legend, but his humanity. That evening, as the sun set, he did not go to a lonely, empty room. He went to the small boarding house run by the preacher's widow, a kind, sturdy woman who had always looked at him not with contempt, but with a deep, sad understanding. He rented a room, a clean room, with a real bed, and a window that looked out over the town he had, in the strangest of ways, just adopted as his own. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if he could stay sober. He did not know if he could ever truly outrun the ghosts of his past. But as he sat by the window, watching the lights of hopes and flicker to life in the gathering twilight, he knew one thing for certain. He had been given a last chance. And this time, he was not going to waste it in the bottom of a bottle. This time, he was going to drink it in one slow, difficult, and precious, sober day at a time. The drunk was gone. The legend was retired. And Cole Younger, for the first time in 15 years, was finally, truly, home.